In May, I highlighted how the NDP Liberal government has failed to uphold its duty to protect children in the agreement signed with the province of British Columbia to decriminalize possession of illicit drugs. I asked the former Minister of Mental Health and Addictions why her government had not done more to protect children. Countless times, needles and other drug paraphernalia have been found on school grounds and in other areas like parks frequented by children, specifically Mill Lake in Abbotsford. Earlier that same day, during debate on an opposition motion related to the opioids crisis, I told this House about the time my son's daycare had to be closed because paraphernalia had been left behind on the property in front of their entranceway. Do you know what the minister's response to me was in question period that day, Madam Speaker? I'll quote, and she stated that the exemption we have approved in British Columbia specifically states that playgrounds and areas attached to schools and daycares are not exempt and must be enforced. Unfortunately, while true, this ignores the fact that this government provided no resources for local health authorities and law enforcement to contain these dangerous drugs and protect communities. And while the government did amend its agreement with BC last month to broaden the scope of areas where these substances are banned, it begs the question of whether these rules will actually be enforced. In 2022, Madam Speaker, a record 2,383 British Columbians needlessly died from an illicit drug overdose. In 2023, we're on pace to surpass that figure. Those British Columbians and the thousands more like them across Canada deserve timely access to treatment and recovery services. Instead, this government has focused on making access to dangerous drugs easier without addressing treatment. The tragic story of Camilla Sword from Coquitlam highlights how easy these drugs are to access for children. She was 14 when she died of an overdose of the very drug this government encourages to be dispersed. Students in the area told the National Post at the time that some as young as 11 were abusing this drug, hydromorphone, and that a tablet could be bought for just $5 to $10 in their community. The reckless and irresponsible implementation of this government's drug handout program has had the tragic and deadly consequence for many Canadian youth. So, Madam Speaker, my question to the Minister this evening is this. Will this government finally uphold their obligation to protect children under the agreement with the province of BC? And will they finally deliver the treatment and recovery services that are so desperately needed in my province and should be tied to any such agreement in the first place? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Appreciate the question from my colleague. This crisis is having a tragic and unrelenting toll on Canadians, their families, and communities. There are 4 pillars recognized internationally that are necessary for a successful substance use strategy. And I should say, Madam Speaker, these are irrefutable. These pillars are well established in the medical community. I'm not a doctor. The member's not a doctor. We ought to listen to science and experts when it comes to something so critical, like protecting the lives of our most vulnerable community members. Those 4 pillars are prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and enforcement. Our government is committed to a comprehensive approach that implements policies and supports in all 4 of these essential areas. To address this public health crisis, we have to use all the tools that we have, including innovative approaches such as granting the province of British Columbia an exemption under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That is a democratic approach. BC asked for this 3-year time-limited exemption that began in January 2023. We take the safety of all Canadians seriously, and that's why from the beginning we've approached this from both a public health and a public safety perspective. This exemption will be continuously monitored, assessed, and adjusted if needed. They requested this exemption because of the stigma that criminalization produces. Criminalization, Madam Speaker, kills people. People are dying because they fear the repercussions of asking for help. The fact is that people who use substances need support, not judgment. They need community, not isolation. They need empathy and understanding, not stigma. Local governments do have tools and bylaws they can use to amend and address any unintended consequences or concerns that their communities are experiencing. Local governments know their community and their needs and what works best for them. Addressing the ongoing public health crisis while maintaining the safety of all Canadians is essential. To ensure the safety of children and youth in BC, this exemption does not apply on elementary and secondary school premises, nor licensed childcare facilities, on playgrounds, at spray pools, or at wading pools, or at skate parks, Madam Speaker. We need to be careful of the potential for recriminalizing personal possession among some of the most vulnerable people who use drugs in our communities. We're committed to continuing our work with British Columbia to find solutions. But to find solutions, we must first understand the many different factors that drive substance use. That must include addressing mental health. Prevention, treatment, and harm reduction measures all have a role to play, as do actions that reduce stigma and provide continued access to health and social supports for individuals. Madam Speaker, let me quote the Vancouver Police Department. Police can now focus on those doing the most harm in this crisis. Person and organized crime groups who import, manufacture, and distribute these toxic substances. They are not aware of any incidents in Vancouver in which safe supply has been trafficked to youth, responding contrary to the assertion of the Leader of the Opposition in a much maligned video that was, frankly, Madam Speaker, disgusting. There are media reports that have made it into the House of Commons that are further stigmatizing individuals and communities, Madam Speaker. I want to know one thing. If the member from Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon would commit to something tonight. The Fraser House Society in his riding is receiving federal funding to create podcasts for men in the trades that will provide tools and information on pain, trauma, and substance use while enhancing awareness, decreasing stigma, and encouraging shared lived experiences. Is he ready to commit to publicly meeting with those individuals? They have answers, insight, and perspective that might help the member further understand the very complex nature of the illness that is addiction, Madam Speaker. I've met with survivors of addiction, with people who have recovered from addiction, and for people who require this help, and he should too. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
In fact, my office is right beside Haven in the Hollow, and every day I see the impacts of the approach taken by this government. At the end of the day, I believe that all of us in this House have one thing in common, and that is that we do not want to see people die. I firmly believe that. But the actions taken by this government were irresponsible because none of the 4 pillars that my colleague from Milton mentioned, prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and enforcement, are tied to the agreement with the province of British Columbia. So since the implementation of their actions, all we've seen is an increase in the number of deaths. To the group he mentioned, I would be pleased to meet with him. And I would also encourage him to come to Vancouver and come to the Fraser Valley, where it's a fact that we do not have treatment options available for people that want to get clean, that want to restart their life, that want to have a fighting chance of breaking addiction. This government has not supported those actions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
It's categorically false that this government hasn't supported recovery options. That's absolutely not the case, Madam Speaker. Harm reduction services are a vital part of a comprehensive, compassionate, and collaborative public health approach to problematic substance use that includes prevention, enforcement, treatment, and additional social and health and social supports. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the invitation from my colleague, but tragically, Milton and the GTA are also experiencing an opioid crisis. There's harm reduction that occurs in my riding. I've met with pharmacists that assist people who are living with addiction to get the services that they require, the treatment that they require, so that they can continue their lives and their journey towards a drug-free life. Madam Speaker, there are a lot of people in the Lower Mainland that I would encourage my colleague to visit with and meet with, because furthering the stigma attached to people who use substances is not a solution to saving their lives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.